Hi, I'm Rowena. My parents gave my bedroom to my sister's dog. Pink wallpaper, nameplate, the whole thing. I didn't get a fight. I got a key to the guest shed. Then they left me off my dad's hospital contact list. Didn't invite me to his birthday. Erased me from the family photo wall. And when I sent a gift, they never even opened it. But I stayed quiet for years, until the night I pulled up to their celebration in a Bentley and brought silence to dinner. Ever wonder how it feels to be treated like the stray, while the family pet gets your place at the table? I hadn't even set my purse down before Mom handed me a key. "It's just for a few months," she said. That soft, sing-song voice she reserved for making things sound less offensive than they were. You know how Isolde gets when she's this far along. She needs peace. Peace. Right. From me. I looked at the old brass key resting in my palm. It had a cheap plastic tag on it with the faded label, Guest Unit. The same unit that backed up to the alley behind their house, where the Wi-Fi barely reached and the heating was hit or miss depending on the wind. I opened my mouth but said nothing. I had learned years ago that challenging her only made things more exhausting. "Just until the baby comes," she added, reaching for a mug like we were still having a normal mother-daughter chat in the kitchen. "You understand, don't you? You've always been the reasonable one." I forced a small smile. "Sure." She brightened immediately, like I'd validated her as a mother. "See? That's why I can count on you. Isolde's going through so much, and Bella, well, you know how she is with the dog." "Bella? The dog? The actual four-legged one. Princess Bella, the Pomeranian with a following on Instagram and her own calendar on the fridge." I felt something sharp twist in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I walked past the hall I used to call mine and carried my overnight bag back out the door. The sun was starting to dip behind the pecan trees, casting golden shadows on the driveway. Mom didn't walk out with me. She just called, "Text me when you settle in, sweetheart," as she shut the door behind her. The guest unit smelled like mothballs and cheap disinfectant. One of the blinds was cracked. I put my bag down on the sagging mattress and sat without turning on the light. I could hear muffled voices from the main house, laughter, clinking glasses, the muffled bark of Bella. Later that evening, under the excuse of forgetting my laptop charger, I let myself back into the main house. It was quieter now. Isolde's SUV wasn't in the driveway. Dad was probably already asleep upstairs. I moved carefully down the hallway. The family photos on the wall had been rearranged again. Somehow, every shot of me seemed to be one frame lower than the rest. When I reached my old room, I paused. The door had a new plaque on it, pink cursive letters that read, "Princess Bella's Suite." For a moment, I thought it was a joke, a theme, maybe a temporary thing. I opened the door. The room had been completely redone, pale pink wallpaper with paw prints, a plush velvet dog bed at the center, surrounded by tiny shelves filled with toys and doggy treats. A miniature chandelier dangled over a white lacquered dresser. I stepped back, numb. My bookshelf was gone. The comforter my grandmother quilted, missing. There was no sign I had ever lived there, except for a single box shoved into the hallway closet, marked, "Rowena, Old." I walked into the garage. There were my books, stacked haphazardly. My framed photos wrapped in torn newspaper. Even the ceramic lamp I'd painted in 6th grade was there, its base cracked. I left without saying a word. By the time I got back to the guest unit, the temperature had dropped. I turned the knob on the heater, but it sputtered and stayed cold. I pulled on a sweater, curled into the corner of the bed, and stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. "Hope you're comfy. Bella's already snoring." I didn't reply. Instead, I turned the key over in my hand. It was cold, dull around the edges. The metal was slightly warped, like it had been copied from something that no longer existed. I whispered to no one. They gave the dog my room. Not even a fight, just a key. The morning after my unceremonious eviction, I woke up in the guest unit to the sound of Bella barking, shrilly, rhythmically, like she was trying to declare her reign over the property. The bed creaked as I sat up. A sliver of light broke through the cracked blinds, and dust floated lazily through it, catching in the air like tiny judgments. I hadn't slept much. The mattress had a tilt, and the radiator wheezed all night like it was mourning its own usefulness. I needed my charger, maybe a warmer sweater, and, if I was being honest, just a minute in my old space to ground myself again. Maybe I'd walk into the house and remember I still belonged somewhere. I slipped on my shoes and crept toward the main house with the key I never gave back. The door opened quietly. No one was in the kitchen. The house felt still, but not in a comforting way. More like the world had moved on while I was left behind in a paused frame. A birthday card sat on the granite counter, propped up like a trophy. "To Bella, our little girl," it read in glittery cursive. Inside were notes from both my parents. Dad's handwriting, stiff and slow. Mom's, bubbly and overly affectionate. There was even a drawing of a bone. I blinked once, twice, then slid the card back exactly where I'd found it. The fridge hummed low. I opened it out of habit, expecting to find orange juice, maybe the leftover chili Mom used to make. Instead, the shelves were stocked with gourmet dog food, packaged in glass jars with labels like organic lamb stew and salmon with bone broth. My almond milk was gone. Even the sticky note with my name that I'd left on it last week had vanished. That was when I realized I wasn't just being edged out. I'd already been erased. I turned toward the hallway, past the photo wall where I used to be centered. My high school graduation portrait now sat lower than the rest. Crooked. I reached to straighten it, then stopped. There was no point fixing a wall that no longer remembered me. As I passed through the living room, I grabbed the old iPad I'd left on the side table months ago. It was scratched along the back, a dent in the corner. It still worked, but the battery wouldn't hold for long. I heard footsteps before I saw her. "Well, well," Isolde said, her voice high and too sweet. She was in workout leggings, hair pulled up in a silk wrap, holding a green smoothie. "Didn't expect to see you here this early. Thought you'd be, I don't know, meditating in your tiny space." I didn't respond. I'd learned it's better to let her tire herself out. She glanced at the iPad in my hand and snorted. "Oh, wow, you're still using that old thing. Mom told me you've gone full minimalist. Don't even have a proper couch anymore, huh?" I turned toward the door, the iPad she was mocking. "I bought it for her, back in college, when she cracked hers before finals and cried in the bathroom for an hour. I'd used 2 weeks of wages from tutoring freshman stats to get it. Now she looked at it like it was a relic of failure. I didn't flinch, didn't offer a reminder. She wouldn't remember. And if she did, she'd twist it into a joke. That's what she was good at, turning memory into a mirror you regretted looking into. "You know," she added as I opened the door, "I always thought it was cool how you never cared what people thought. Guess that comes with having less." Her words landed softer than she intended, but only because I'd stopped expecting anything kinder. Outside, the sun had risen fully. I walked back toward the guest unit, gripping the iPad tighter. The chill in the air was sharper than yesterday. As I let myself into the guest unit, I sat on the mattress, legs crossed, and stared at the wall. My reflection flickered faintly in the dark TV screen across from me. Funny how quickly you become eccentric the moment you stop handing over what's yours. And yet somehow, the dog still had a room, and I didn't. It was a Thursday night, just after 10, when my phone buzzed with a message from Lucinda. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling of the guest unit, the same pale yellow panels I'd come to resent for how indifferent they were to me. Her text was short. Simple. "Why didn't you come to your father's birthday? Everyone missed you." I stared at the screen for a full minute. A slow burn started in my chest, then settled somewhere deep in my stomach. I hadn't been invited. Not a call, not a card, not even a group message. I opened Facebook, scrolled down, and there it was. An entire photo album tagged under Alton's 65th. Table settings, smiling relatives, candles, a large chocolate cake with "To the Greatest Dad" written in cursive. I clicked through the images, pausing on one where the dining room was full. Every seat was taken. My seat? Gone. I kept going, faster now, until I reached a photo of the slideshow projected on the far wall. It was a montage of family pictures, except I wasn't in them. Not one. Not even the old ones. Halloween costumes from third grade, school plays, graduations. I knew those moments had happened because I had the dresses tucked in storage bins back in Austin, but somehow, I'd been edited out of the very timeline I lived through. I closed the app and sat in the quiet, letting the silence take up more space than it had a right to. The next morning, I drove back to the main house under the excuse of picking up a package. I didn't even know if there was one waiting. I just needed to see something, anything, to make this ache stop rattling around inside me. Marlena wasn't home. The front door was unlocked as usual. I stepped into the living room, half hoping someone would notice and ask why I looked the way I felt. No one did. The room was warm, filled with the scent of citrus cleaner. On the coffee table, a stack of unopened mail sat under a half-read People magazine. And there it was, wrapped in gold paper, still sealed. The gift I had sent for my father's birthday. I had chosen it carefully, a vintage fountain pen from a local Austin antique shop engraved in small serif script. To Alton, the man who taught me silence. I didn't leave a card. I figured the message was clear enough, but there it sat, unopened, forgotten beneath coupons and catalogs. Alton came down the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, the other tucking a handkerchief into his back pocket. He paused when he saw me. "I didn't think you were still around," he said. That was it. No, hello, no, how have you been? Just surprised that I hadn't disappeared completely. "I needed to grab something," I replied, not bothering to pretend I believed in whatever illusion of civility we were performing. He nodded and walked to the kitchen without asking what I needed. No mention of the gift, no curiosity about my presence. As if I were the UPS driver or a neighbor's stray cat, unremarkable, momentary. I didn't follow him. Instead, I turned, picked up the package with both hands, and carried it out. I didn't leave a note. Back in the guest unit, I sat on the floor, the gift still in my lap. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I just stared at the golden wrapping and wondered how long it had been since anyone in that house remembered I had ever existed without being reminded. The night pressed in. I didn't turn on the lamp. There was something comforting in the shadows. When people leave you out long enough, I whispered into the dark, you stop asking why. You just learn to write your own name back in. They didn't forget me. They erased me. The invitation came in the form of a text. Mom rarely texted. When she did, it was always clipped, no punctuation, like each word cost her something. "Tea?" she wrote. "Just us." It was Friday. I hadn't seen her since the day I walked out with the unopened birthday gift under my arm. Maybe she wanted to clear the air. Or maybe she wanted to pretend none of it happened. Either way, I agreed. When I stepped into the house, the smell of cinnamon and lemon cleaner greeted me. The table in the breakfast nook had two mismatched teacups, a small plate of ginger cookies, and a candle that read, "Bless this mess." Cute, if it weren't so ironic. "Sit, sit," she said, brushing crumbs from the seat opposite hers. "You look tired. Are you sleeping okay over there?" Over there. Like I lived on the other side of the state, not 50 feet from the back porch. "I'm sleeping fine," I replied, folding my hands in my lap. We sipped in near silence for a while. She picked at the cookies but didn't eat them. I waited. She always had a preamble. Finally, she said, "Do you remember when Isolde got into that mentorship program in Chicago? God, she was only 22. Such a go-getter. I still have the email where they said her project was the most impressive of the year." I blinked slowly. "The project about community mapping?" "Yes, that one. So insightful. They said it could be published. Did you ever read it?" "I wrote it." The air changed. Not like a bomb dropping, more like a door slamming 2 rooms away. Her eyes shifted. Not in shock, but in calculation. "Sweetheart, don't start with that again. You helped. You two were always bouncing ideas off each other. That's what sisters do." "No, I wrote it entirely." She asked for my final paper draft because her topic fell through at the last minute. She promised she'd cite me. Marlena smiled tightly. "Well, it worked out, didn't it?" "Got her a foot in the door." I bit my cheek hard enough to taste metal. She reached for another cookie. "We all pitch in for each other," she said airily, "like when your sister helped you get started, that first year after you left school." I tilted my head. You mean when I used my scholarship refund to pay off her credit card? $4,000 she racked up buying concert tickets and rent-a-runway dresses? She waved a hand. Oh, come on. You act like she never paid you back. She didn't. You never asked. I stared at her. Because I thought I didn't have to. She chuckled softly, pouring more tea. That's what family's for, right? Give and take. But mostly give, I murmured. She didn't hear me, or pretended not to. I watched her fix her tea like she had every answer already preloaded in her tone. There was no room in her version of the story for me to be anything but a supporting character in Isolde's spotlight. So I stopped talking. I listened. I nodded. I smiled. And somewhere between her going on about how Isolde might get promoted, again, I started mentally cataloging everything. The $4,000, the paper, the mentorship credit, the dozens of "you're so understandings" and "you're so matures" that had translated into "you'll take the hit so we don't have to." I wasn't angry in that moment, not exactly. It was more like a quiet tick of realization, like I had walked into a play halfway through and finally figured out I wasn't the lead. I was just the prop that made the star look better. That day, I stopped hoping they'd ever remember, and started remembering for them. I wasn't just taking tea, I was taking mental inventory. It started with a tax form. Marlena had texted me, again, surprisingly formal for her. Need your W-9. Drop by today? So I showed up. Not because I wanted to, but because the paperwork was still tied to the old house and the family trust, which she refused to move out of my name. That meant I still had obligations, even if they no longer saw me as one of their own. When I walked into the kitchen, she was standing by the sink, humming along to some old country ballad. Isolde was at the table, scrolling through her phone, a half-eaten croissant and iced coffee sitting beside her like props in a magazine shoot. "Rowena," Mom said with exaggerated warmth, "that blazer's nice on you. You used to dress so elegantly before all that computer work made you practical." I set the envelope down and forced a polite nod. Isolde looked up and smiled, too wide, too rehearsed. "You were going to be a professor, right? Whatever happened to that?" I didn't answer. But my mind wandered back. 10 years ago, a letter from NYU offering a full ride to their master's program. I was packing when Marlena pulled me aside with a folded dish towel in her hands, like she couldn't look me in the eye without something to fidget with. "You don't need all that," she'd said, like education was clutter. "A husband won't care about degrees. Be present, be simple, stay close to home." I'd nodded then, like I always did. Back in the kitchen, the conversation turned toward Isolde's new work event. "She's presenting next week in Houston," Marlena beamed. "Big corporate crowd. She's really coming into her own." I said nothing. My silence filled the room like smoke, unseen but choking. Isolde laughed. "Don't look so serious. You always had that face when you were losing at Monopoly." I looked at her, calmly. "You know what hurts more than being overlooked? Being told to dream smaller. For your own good." The air dropped. Marlena's hand stilled mid-stir in her tea. Isolde blinked. "Excuse me?" I turned to Mom. "You didn't ask me to stay because you believed in me. You asked me to stay because it was easier than watching me leave you behind." Marlena recovered fast. "You've always been distant, hard to reach." I almost laughed. "Because I waited a decade for one sentence from you. I'm sorry. Never came." She opened her mouth, but I was already reaching for my purse. "You wanted me simple, present, quiet. That's not love. That's convenience." And this time, I didn't linger to see her face crumble. I walked out of the house I once called home, down the same porch steps I used to skip as a child. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was rewriting the script. Saturday morning started like most of mine lately, quiet. I had just finished a call with our Tokyo team, the kind that makes your brain feel like it's moving half a second behind your mouth. My second coffee was cold. I was finally settling into a spreadsheet when the notification pinged. "Unusual activity detected on your credit card ending in 4240. I stared at the screen, brows furrowed. I hadn't used that card in years. It should have been closed. I clicked through the alert. $822.69, charged to a luxury hotel in Houston. Room service, valet, spa. I didn't travel last week. I didn't even leave Austin. I pulled up the account. The billing address was still Marlena's house. My name was still primary. I clicked Contact Us and hit the call button. The woman on the other end was kind but robotic. Yes, ma'am, this card is still active. Authorized secondary user listed as Isolde. Would you like to remove her from the account? I'd like to cancel the entire thing, I said. Effective immediately. Yes, ma'am. Canceling now. You'll receive a written confirmation via email. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat back. My hand was still hovering over the mouse. The number of times I'd let things like this go, brushed them off, excused them. It stacked higher than any spreadsheet. No more. I grabbed my keys and drove. San Antonio wasn't far, but the highway felt longer than usual. I walked through the front door without knocking. Marlena was in the kitchen, dicing celery with a concentration that felt almost theatrical. She looked up and smiled faintly. Rowena, surprise visit? I held out the printed credit card statement. You know anything about this? She took it, squinted, then shrugged. No clue. Ask your sister. As if on cue, Isolde appeared at the top of the stairs, towel wrapped around her head, phone in hand. Oh, she said casually. Meant to text you. I used your card for the reservation, since the points are still yours. I figured you'd want to keep the account active. Plus, I upgraded the room. I stared at her. You figured I'd want to keep paying for things I didn't approve? She blinked, smirked a little. It's not a big deal. I'll Venmo you later. You've said that before. Marlena chimed in. It was one hotel. Don't make this into a crisis. Your sister just wanted a nice weekend. You're doing fine, right? There it was. That old logic. I could afford to be stolen from. So it wasn't theft. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. You assumed, I said, eyes locked with Isolde. Again. Neither of them replied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a door. I left. On the way back to Austin, my phone rang again. This time, it was the hospital. Are you the daughter of Alton Whitmore? The voice asked. He's been admitted, chest pain. He's stable now, but you may want to come. I turned the car around. By the time I reached the ER, the fluorescent lights were already clawing at my eyes. I rushed to the reception desk. A nurse looked up from her screen. Name? Rowena Whitmore. I'm his daughter. She checked the tablet, shook her head. Only immediate families allowed in right now. You're not on the list. I'm his daughter. I'm sorry. Only names on file can be cleared for visits. Just then, Isolde walked out of the double doors, still in heels, still scrolling her phone. She looked up, saw me, then walked past without a word. I stood 5 feet from my father's room, and 20 miles from ever being seen again. I spent most of Sunday with my blinds drawn and a spreadsheet open, the glow from my laptop throwing long shadows across the kitchen counter. I hadn't planned to spend the weekend like this, but after the ER, after being told I wasn't listed as immediate family while my sister walked in and out like she owned the air he breathed, I couldn't pretend anymore. The file folder was labeled in black marker. Favors never returned. It had started as a joke, a petty little rebellion during my 20s when I realized I was always the one giving, covering, cleaning up. I hadn't looked at it in years. I took it out now, page by page. Receipts from a credit card I'd co-signed, Venmo screenshots where she promised to pay me next week, emails where I'd edited her cover letters, rewritten her bios, loan documents from when Mom borrowed just until the refinance went through, and never mentioned it again. And then I found the email. It was buried in an old thread with a bank rep. Isolde had replied directly to a shared inquiry. Thanks again, Rowena, for letting me use the card last minute. Same billing as always. I'll send the transfer this week. She never did. I added it to the folder. Then I added dates, amounts, contexts. I made a chart, not because I needed the money, but because I was done forgetting. They kept acting like I was the one who distanced myself, like I was cold, hard to read. But the truth was simpler. They just never bothered to see me at all. By the time dusk settled outside my apartment window, I'd organized 15 years of help into a neatly tabbed PDF. Screenshots, messages, Transaction history. I wasn't angry. I was efficient. And clarity has its own kind of burn. Later that night, I sat on the floor with a glass of wine, scrolling through old photos. I paused at one, my undergrad thesis presentation. A packed room, me at the podium, bright-eyed and shaky but proud. The project was titled Narrative Architecture, Mapping Memory Through Story. It had won me 2 university awards. 2 years after that, Isolde had submitted a version of it, barely reworded, for a public relations internship. She got the spot. I got a call from Mom. "I'm so glad your work could help your sister. That's what family does, right?" She said it like it was gospel, like I was supposed to be proud, like my erasure was an offering I should have been happy to make. But I wasn't proud. I was exhausted. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I uploaded the file, neatly organized, to a Google Drive folder and shared it with exactly 2 people, Marlena and Isolde. I wrote one line in the message: "For your records, since you forgot mine." Then I logged off. This time, I kept the receipts, financial and emotional. The invitation came in a group text. Family dinner for Isolde's promotion, formal attire, 7 p.m. sharp. Sent from Marlena's number, no salutation, no personalization. It was the kind of message you send to people who are expected to show up, not wanted. I didn't reply. I just looked at it for a while and let it sit. 2 days later, I booked a Bentley, not to show off, not really. It was more like armor. The car pulled up outside the house at exactly 6:58. Through the frosted glass of the dining room windows, I could already hear laughter. Tight, performative, the kind reserved for occasions where everyone's trying too hard to be perfect. I stepped out slowly, dressed in a tailored black suit and low heels, minimalist makeup, hair slicked into a bun. I looked like I could have walked out of a boardroom or a courtroom. As I reached the front door, the laughter inside softened to murmurs. I rang the bell. Marlena opened the door. She blinked twice before pasting on a smile. "Rowena, you made it." "Of course," I said simply. "It's family." The dining room was full. Isolde sat at the head of the table, mid-toast when I entered. She paused, the champagne flute suspended in mid-air. "Look who finally decided to rejoin civilization," she said with that honeyed acidity she'd mastered. I didn't respond. I nodded politely to the table, then sat in the one empty seat, oddly, directly across from her. Dinner began. Small talk bounced around like ping-pong balls. Property taxes, Pilates, new restaurants. Marlena gushed about Isolde's promotion. "Our Isolde will be the youngest VP in the region," she said, beaming. "The board absolutely loves her leadership style." Isolde smiled modestly, then turned to me. "And Rowena, still freelancing, right? You always did make frugality look fashionable." There it was. I took a sip of water and nodded. Still making it work. We made it to dessert. Chocolate tartlets, perfect and hollow. I waited until the room settled again, forks scraping gently against porcelain. Then I stood up, pulling my phone from my jacket. "There's something I'd like to share," I said. The room quieted. A few heads turned. Marlena's smile faltered. I tapped the screen. The video played through the speakers. Isolde's voice, sharp and clipped. "You wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for my family name. Maybe next time, show some gratitude before you embarrass yourself." A gasp. Utensils clinked and stilled. Someone's phone buzzed, unanswered. I let the silence marinate for a moment. Then I turned to Marlena. "The board she's interviewing with requested background transparency. I figured I'd help." Isolde's face drained of color. "That was taken out of context," she snapped, standing. "Which part? The shouting or the entitlement?" Marlena tried to speak, but no words came, just the slow lowering of her fork to her napkin. No one moved. I gathered my phone, adjusted my blazer. "Enjoy the tartlets." I walked out the same way I came in, slow, composed, untouched. It took 5 seconds of footage to undo 15 years of performance. 2 days after the dinner, the silence had grown limbs. I didn't hear from anyone, not Marlena, not Isolde, not even the distant cousins who usually sent the "you were missed" texts after family events. The only sign they remembered I existed was a vague Facebook status from Aunt Denise that read, "Sometimes it takes an outsider to burn a family photo." No names, no tags, just enough shade to suggest the fire starter. I wasn't surprised. Back in Austin, I went about my week like nothing had happened. But something had. I could feel it in the way I walked, lighter, in the way I worked, faster. When truth has been kept down long enough, setting it loose feels like giving your lungs back their original size. Still, a part of me waited. For backlash, for confrontation, for someone to knock on my door with accusations or tears. What I got instead was my father. He showed up mid-afternoon, without warning. I was in the middle of watering my succulents when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, he stood there holding his baseball cap in both hands like he wasn't sure if he was visiting or confessing. "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. We sat in the kitchen. I offered him tea. He declined. He looked around at the space like it was unfamiliar territory. Maybe it was. "I didn't expect to see you," I said after a while. He shifted in the chair. "Didn't expect to come, but I saw the clip." I raised an eyebrow. He looked down at his hands. "You didn't cry?" I blinked. "Should I have?" He shook his head. "No, I always thought you would. When everything finally snapped, I figured you'd fall apart." I leaned back in my chair. "You only thought that because I never told you I was building something while I stayed quiet." He didn't answer, didn't apologize either. But for once, he didn't deflect. He just nodded, slow and small, like he'd finally seen something he'd missed for years. When he left, he didn't say goodbye. Just patted the table twice and walked out. Back at Marlena's house, I heard from Lucinda later, things had gone sideways. Isolde had spent the last 2 days crying, but not because she felt guilty, because the board called to say they were reevaluating her candidacy. Marlena, of course, responded like she always did. "We'll fix this," she told Isolde. "We always clean up family messes." But this time, Isolde replied, "This wasn't a mess. It was exposure." That night, Lucinda texted me a single line. "You didn't break them. You just stopped hiding their cracks." And she was right. It wasn't a bomb I dropped. It was a mirror. The email came at 6:42 a.m., tucked between a Google Calendar alert and a spam ad for wrinkle cream. "Property tax reminder. Parcel number 4173, due April 15th. At first, I almost deleted it, but the parcel number caught my eye. It was the house. Their house. I sat up, rubbed my temples, and clicked open the attachment. The mailing address was still listed under mine. My name, in bold, top left. Rowena J. Whitmore, owner. 3 years ago, I'd bailed them out of foreclosure. Quietly. I was flush from an early startup exit, and they were 3 months from losing the only thing they'd ever valued more than appearances, their address. Marlena said they were restructuring. Isolde said the bank had made a mistake. I never asked questions. I just wired the money, filed the deed, and never brought it up again. Now, reading the bill, I wondered why I ever thought they'd remember. I opened the file folder where I kept scanned legal documents. Scrolled past the LLC forms, patent filings, and board notes until I found it. Deed of title transfer. Owner of record, Rowena J. Whitmore. "They gave my room to a dog," I said out loud to no one. "I gave them a roof they forgot wasn't theirs." That afternoon, I printed everything. Tax bill, deed, notarized transfer. Slid them into a manila envelope and drove south. The door opened before I knocked. Marlena stood there in pressed slacks and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rowena? No notice?" "Didn't think I needed one. I brought something." She stepped aside. I walked into the kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd once told me, "Ambition can wait, family needs don't." The table was already set for dinner. Alton came in from the garage, wiping his hands on an old rag. "You here for the food?" he asked, half joking. "No, just dropping off a few documents." I placed the envelope in the center of the table and opened it, laid out the deed. The tax reminder. The line where my name still sat. Isolde walked in from the hallway, phone in one hand, hair still damp from a shower. She saw the papers, then me. "What's this?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "You live here," I said evenly. "I own here. We're not the same." Marlena's fingers stiffened on the edge of the table. Alton glanced down but said nothing. Isolde scoffed. "So what? You want rent? A parade?" I turned to her, calm. "No, I want clarity." "You think this makes you better?" she snapped. I met her gaze without blinking. "No, just not invisible anymore." I picked up the envelope and slid the deed back inside. They didn't ask for copies. As I walked back toward the front door, my phone buzzed. A message from my co-founder. "We closed the Series B. Valuation at 14.2 Annas. You did it, R." I smiled, tucked the phone into my coat pocket. Some people inherit homes. I build them, starting with myself. The park was nearly empty, just me, the wind, and a scattering of joggers weaving between oaks like silent metronomes. Zilker always looked its best in the early hours, before the dogs, before the strollers, before the world remembered it existed. I liked that about it. It didn't beg for attention. It just was. I moved slowly along the gravel path, letting my steps find their rhythm. 10 days since the dinner. 10 days since I left them with a truth they didn't know how to swallow. I hadn't heard from Marlena or Isolde since then. Alton had disappeared back into whatever pocket of silence he'd crawled into years ago. Still, the absence didn't ache. Not like it used to. It felt earned. As I rounded a bend near the pond, I thought of something Maya Angelou once said. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." I hadn't, not for years. I kept rewriting the story, trying to find a version where I was safe, wanted, real. But now, walking alone under the rising sun, I finally believed them. They were who they'd always been, and I was no longer asking them to change. My phone rang just as I passed the sculpture garden. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Rowena." Marlena's voice filled my ear, gentle, like a prayer rehearsed too many times. "Hi, sweetheart." I stopped walking. "Hi." "I wanted to call. To talk. It's been a lot." "For who?" She hesitated. "All of us." There was a pause long enough to hear her shift the phone to the other ear. "I know things got heated, but families go through rough seasons. We survive them. We heal." Her words were perfectly measured. A script. I imagined she'd practiced it in front of a mirror, smoothing the edges until they couldn't cut her anymore. "You know," she continued, "maybe it's time you came back. For good. Let's try again. The door's always open." I let the silence stretch between us. Then, quietly, I said, "You don't want me back. You want the version of me that didn't speak, that didn't challenge your stories. You want quiet. You want useful. That's not love. That's utility." Her breath caught. I could hear it. I didn't wait for the counter-argument. "Take care of yourself, Marlena." And I ended the call. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I didn't leave space for her to turn this into a lesson. Because it wasn't. It was an ending. Later that evening, back home, I stood by the window and looked out over the city. My phone buzzed with a message from Lucinda. "You changed the legacy, Ro. That's enough." And it was. I didn't leave to teach them a lesson. I left because I finally learned mine. I didn't slam the door. I built a new one behind me. The lights dimmed, and the rustle of anticipation filled the ballroom. I stood just behind the curtain, hands steady, breath even. This was the third time I'd keynoted a fintech summit, but the first time the invitation came with a full-page spread in the program. Rowena Whitmore, co-founder and lead architect, the woman behind the algorithm powering Asia's markets. I stepped onto the stage. The applause was warm, respectful, not wild, not shallow. The kind that came when the room knew your name because of your work, not your last name. I paused at the podium and looked out across the rows of faces. I didn't scan for them, but I saw them anyway. Marlena and Alton, seated in the front row, sandwiched between the Financial Times editor and a Goldman Sachs executive. I doubted they knew they were on camera when they RSVP'd, Likely didn't even know the board had added them to the VIP list out of respect for Rowena's roots. Roots. That word used to choke me. I smiled and adjusted the mic. They told me I was too quiet to lead, I began. They were right. I lead quietly. Laughter. Then a silence that felt like reverence. The speech flowed. I spoke of innovation, resilience, legacy, not the kind that's handed down, but the kind you build brick by brick when no one's watching. I didn't mention family. I didn't need to. The room already knew. At the post-event reception, Marlena approached with that brittle warmth she wore like a cashmere coat. "You were wonderful, sweetheart," she said, arms half lifted for a hug I didn't move into. I looked at her, measured. "You're not here because you're proud," I said. "You're here because now you have to explain me to your friends." Her face fell just slightly. Alton lingered a few feet behind her, pretending to examine a sculpture that didn't interest him. Across the room, Lucinda caught my eye. She smiled, quiet, grounded, unbothered. I turned back to Marlena and said, "Excuse me." I walked away. At my reserved table, there were only 2 seats left. I pulled out one, not for Marlena, not for Alton, but for Lucinda. She laughed as she sat. "You finally remembered to save me a chair." "Only fair," I said. "You've saved me more than I can count." Champagne was poured. Glasses clinked. Lucinda raised hers. "To building something that couldn't be stolen, not even by family." I looked around the room, at investors, engineers, journalists. Not one of them cared what high school I went to. Not one of them asked why I wasn't closer to my parents. And not one of them had ever tried to take credit for my work. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I left without applause. I returned without seeking it. But this time, I sit at the table, and the seat has my name on it. And this time, no one can take it away. Not even the ones who never offered it.